Alright, this was the first matchup between the best bigs in the league this year, and it didn't disappoint, because both sides had advantages playing through them. But in the first, the main advantage stemmed from the ridiculous pace, because a lot of the times, both sides were catching the other's defense not being set, so they were either getting a run out or flowing into their quick hitters, and the Spurs got into a rhythm early. As expected, the Nugs just struggled to contain the rock, so their first line was getting broken easily, and that just led to the Spurs unlocking their entire offense, because they were able to get wherever they wanted. In their screening actions, the Nugs had their bigs drop, unless it was Vassell coming off, because he's a shooting threat off the dribble, so the Nugs had Jokic show on his, and the Spurs just had to either exploit the space against the drop, or exploit the backside whenever Vassell drew too. Those advantages led to the Nugs making a couple adjustments, and both of them worked, so from the second onward, the Spurs gradually started to struggle on offense, because when the Nugs decided to zone up, the Spurs weren't able to exploit middle. That was a little surprising, because their guards usually recognize that space, and will flash there to shift the defense around, but they just couldn't do that enough. That was the start of their stagnation issues, and then the second adjustment made it all worse, because by hiding Jokic onto either Keldon or Champagny, depending on the lineup, it was forcing one of them to be the screeners. Even though it really didn't make sense to sign Jokic onto Champagny in theory, I can still understand why, because he's usually a shooting threat on the spot up, so in the Spurs starting lineup, Jokic had to defend the least against him, and against Keldon, it made a lot of sense. Jokic just didn't have to respect Keldon on the spot up or as a screener, but either way, the principle was the same, and more importantly, it took away the Spurs' ability to use Wemby as the main screener, because Aaron was assigned to him, so a simple switch could blow up any of their screening actions. I saw Wemby looking to set more off-ball screens than on-ball ones, and the only time the Spurs could get more on-ball screens was whenever Kornet was on the floor, because the Nugs were matching up traditionally against him. But even during his minutes, those weren't leading to anything, because the Spurs' second unit couldn't exploit the drop, so the Spurs just decided to stick with Wemby for most of the second half, and in the third, they were trying to play 5 out. I think Wemby did a good job of attacking the gaps, because he was able to shift the Nugs shell, and that was throughout the night, not just in that quarter, so he was able to generate good looks for the others or himself. But I still think they were settling from deep a bit too much, so in the fourth, they decided to basically funnel everything through Wemby, because they started flooding one side of the floor, and that overload was allowing him to attack the single side with a shooter in the strong corner. Early in the quarter, that shooter was Fox, then later in the quarter, it was Vassell, and that opened up the floor for Wemby to play out the elbows, because that pinned the Nugs' help from the strong side, so the help had to come from the weak side. That just led to Wemby getting the roll advantages early, then he was able to exploit the pin downs later, and even just attack his matchup, but he did miss the potential game winner, so then they went on to lose in OT, because their offensive struggles just eventually caught up to him down the wire. They couldn't ever go to their Fox and Wemby two-man game, so they had no advantages to play through, and the Nugs deserve a lot of credit, because throughout the night, their raw containment was aggressive, their switches were clean, and their rotations were consistent, so they made it difficult for the Spurs to break their shell. That was by far their best defensive performance of the year, because it was from top to bottom, and I even saw Jokic sliding his feet on the perimeter, or even challenging lays at the rim. But that was just his impact on defense, and it was even greater on offense, because as expected, the Nugs were running a lot of their usual screening actions through him. They were able to establish their own rhythm early through their pace and quick hitters, until the Spurs made the same adjustment and assigned their bigs onto non-shooters, because that made it difficult for the Nugs offense to continue using Jokic as the hub, so depending on the lineup, the screener had to either be Bruce, Christian, or even Cam at times. That allowed the Spurs to assign Keldon onto Jokic, and that caused problems for the Nugs, because first, the Spurs could just blow up their screening actions with a simple switch against Jokic. Then second, it allowed the Spurs bigs to just cheat off their assignment. There were even instances where Keldon was just face guarding Jokic to deny him the rock, but I don't think it was as effective compared to the Nugs making the adjustment, because first, the other Nugs made him pay, so Christian and Cam were making timely trades throughout, and then second was Jokic using his size advantage against Keldon, especially on the O-boards. All those fouls he was drawing allowed him to live at the line in a second, and in turn, those were another reason for the Spurs losing their rhythm, because those were slowing the game down, so they eventually adjusted back to traditional matchups in the second half. That just led to the Nugs basically funneling everything through Jokic, so on the rock, he was getting a lot of inverteds, then off the rock, he was the hub for their usual screening actions again, especially horns, because that was their best action on the night, and they were even able to play through their two-man game down the wire. Those were the most touches Maul got, because throughout the night, he just wasn't able to get on the rock without Jokic as the screener, and with the second unit, the Spurs didn't have to respect the others, so he just wasn't able to do much. But I still don't think their half-court execution was great, and their best source of offense was really in transition, because for some reason, the Spurs just struggled to match up throughout the night, so the Nugs constantly capitalized in the second half. There were even instances where I saw them lose track of Jokic in the half court, and I was really surprised to see them disorganized that often, because they're usually a way better defensive team compared to the Nugs, but the Nugs somehow looked more connected on the night. The Spurs' disconnect eventually cost them on the game-tying ATO in the fourth, because after Cam and Tim emptied out to the weak side, Aaron set a great cross for Jokic to catch the rock in the mid-post, and that caused Champagnie and Wemby to overreact, so Aaron got an easy dunk on the roll. It's rare to see that type of mistake from them, and that disconnect even carried over into OT, so the Nugs either continue to catch their defense not being set, or continue playing through Jokic, because the Nugs knew how to exploit their advantages. Just watch the tape.